Hey everyone, my name is Miriam Porkai. I work in the event team at the college. Welcome to our webinar today, JMIRO Publication and Workshop. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of our country throughout Australia and recognise their continuing connection to land, water and culture. We pay our respect to the elders past, present and emerging. RANZCA also acknowledges Māori tangata whenua and Treaty of Waitangi partners in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Together, we restate our shared commitment to advancing Aboriginal Torres Strait Islanders and Māori health and education. Our Q&A session will take place at the end of the webinar, so thank you to those who pre-submitted their questions already. Please participate by submitting your questions in the question field on your control panel. I'd like to take this moment to introduce Professor Michael Barton, who has been the Editor-in-Chief of JMIRO. He has published over 200 peer-reviewed papers and has received over 20 million in research grants. He founded the Ingham Institute for Medical Research in Southwest Sydney and has led projects for WHO and the International Atomic Energy Agency. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Mariana. So I'd like to welcome everybody to this workshop for JMIRO and to thank the presenters for giving their time and sharing their knowledge with us, and to thank the college for hosting this webinar. So this webinar is on promoting your research, and why would you want to do that? Well, the prime aim of research, apart from having a publication on your CV, is so that people will use your research to improve patient care. It's also very useful to promote your research to find potential collaborators, or rather so they can find you. And for those to whom it matters, it is a very useful factor in academic, advancing an academic career. So we have a jam-packed couple of hours on publications, and particularly the new open access movement, how to use social media, how to build your own electronic profile, and how to use research for advocacy, and how to manage the media in promoting your research. Our first speaker is Mr. Simon Goody. Simon has over 20 years of experience working with our publisher Wiley across the production editorial range of roles. He's strategically managed an extensive list of journals, and he's invaluable for us at JMIRO in getting our publication to the high standard which it currently boasts. Simon is going to talk today about the whole issue of publication, open access, bibliometrics, what all those funny numbers mean. So I'll pass you over to Simon now. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Michael, and thank you to the college and to the journal as well for the opportunity to present today and to talk about these couple of topics. I'll show my screen and hopefully that will appear. So today I'll be looking at two topics. I work with Wiley, I work at the journal's publisher, and have a it gives me the opportunity to look across what's happening in publishing more broadly and looking at these trends that are happening. And hopefully the presentation that I'm doing today will bookend the other presentations a bit. I think the two topics I'm talking about will be open access, which is all about accessibility of research and making sure that research that's published is able to be read and accessed. And then a little bit about bibliometrics, which is basically measuring impact of published research. The other sessions today will talk about discoverability and promotion and getting research read. So hopefully there's some nice complements here. What I'll start on is just a little bit about open access for a start. And it's a topic that has had a lot of discussion recently. We've seen open access as a publishing method really pick up speed in recent years. And certainly where we look at journals such as JMIRO, which has an open access option for all authors, we've seen the adoption of open access really pick up. Open access broadly here's a loose definition, I guess, looking at what distinguishes open access publication. And typically where we talk about open access, we're distinguishing open access published articles versus subscription-based articles. So we know the subscription model has been the predominant way of publishing both research and other content over years, where it's been an access-based business model and method of publishing. But what distinguishes open access are the key points I've got on screen here. So for this discussion, the primary benefit of publishing open access is free accessibility of published content. So publishing under open access terms, there's no paywall, there's no restriction for readers to access content. That it doesn't require an institutional login, a library login. All articles published under open access terms are made freely available as soon as they're published. Where we talk about a webinar focused on promotion and maximizing the impact of research, the benefit to that is pretty obvious. Without barriers to entry, your research can have much greater impact. So that's the primary benefit of open access when it comes to this session. Otherwise, there's some interesting points about copyright. So authors retain the copyright to their work and instead license their work under a Creative Commons license. Compared to a subscription model, previously in subscription publishing, authors would typically sign over copyright to the owner of the journal, and there'd be much more restrictions, many more restrictions around what people can do with that content and how it can be reused, what kind of rights licensing and copyright restrictions there are. Under open access, that's a lot more broad. So it enables greater dissemination and greater reuse of the research work that's being published, again, enhancing the impact of the work. The other key differentiating factor for open access publishing is that the business model is flipped as well. So rather than articles being pay to read, the model becomes a pay to publish model. And that's what we talk a little bit more about today when it comes to you as authors and potential authors looking to publish work open access. What does that mean? Like, where is that, how is that handled? There's clear advantages to publishing open access, and this comes from a Wiley study that was done recently, looking at the benefits and looking over a pretty broad time frame. And what we found that open access articles are downloaded over 3 times more than the subscription articles over the same period. So where we take down that subscription access barrier, that barrier to entry, we see that, not surprisingly, articles are accessed more. This is true both across the traditional readers of the journal, so where we talk about other researchers who would typically have subscription access, but also broader as well, where we look at people in industry, where we look at patient access. It broadens the scope of people able to access research. We see there's a slight citation benefit as well, 1.6 times the citations. As we talk about bibliometrics and go into some of the other measurements, then there's an obvious benefit for that as well. Where we track non-citation metrics under alt metrics, which I'll close this presentation on actually, we see there's a 4 times benefit there as well. This will really come into play where later speakers talk about promotion, and particularly in media and social media. But knowing that, that open access research can be promoted more broadly and accessed more widely, that has a real knock-on effect in terms of the metrics that we're able to track. There's also been a significant increase in acceptance of open access publishing, understanding and embracing this model from authors. And again, coming from a separate Wiley survey that had a broad number of authors responding, we've seen that the rate of open access publishing has increased greatly. You can see that's jumped from 44% in 2021 to the 75% from this survey held in 2023. So the actual experience of authors publishing open access has increased greatly. And you can see that there's been broad agreement that publishing open access has had a material impact in increasing the impact of their work. 85% agreement is fairly impressive. And we also noted that that where it comes to the pay to publish model or the APC funded model, there's real agreement in the way that this is now being handled at an institutional level as opposed to an individual author level. This is what I'll touch on now, where we talk about transformational agreements. So when open access first started becoming more prevalent, all those APCs and those publication charges were being levied at an author level, where individual invoices were being paid to authors. Authors had to look around for their own funding, for institutional support to pay those, and it was a lot of work involved. What we're moving to now within the industry is looking at institutional support for those, and also looking across institutional consortia, such as the CALL consortium, which is the Council of Australian University Librarians. This is a really good example of a transformational agreement. And what it means is that if you're a member of any of the 53 institutions that are within CALL, basically, if your institution has university in the name of it, you're probably covered by this agreement. You don't have to pay an APC directly at a personal level. That is handled at an institutional level, and there is the ability to note that when you submit your article and you're going through the publishing process, and all the back-end payment, all the paperwork behind that is handled by Wiley and your institution. You just say that you'd like to publish open access and start recognizing the benefits we touched on at the start. A couple of caveats in how you actually access this and take advantage of it. The corresponding author of the paper must be a member of a CALL institution. So that means that they must also be using their institutional email address as their corresponding email address. This makes it so that CALL and the university can pick that up as we go through the publication process, and they're able to quickly approve that for you. And you can go through the publication without worrying about that direct payment. What it looks like in practice, we try to make it pretty obvious. Don't worry about too many of the details here, but this is the process that an author would go through as their article proceeds through to publication. There's a checklist here about your details and about your affiliations and those kind of article details, but then you get a big message that comes up and says, do you want to publish open access? The Wiley system will pick up that your corresponding email author address is eligible for the CALL agreement. There's links through to the details on this page, and the default option there, the big yes button, is to make your research available open access. So hopefully that we're surfacing this and making this very obvious as you go through the publication process, and it enables you to take advantage of the open access publishing quite easily. Once you click yes on this page, the rest is handled behind the scenes and you go through the normal publication process. So what we're seeing in general is a much greater uptake of open access across pretty much all journals at the moment, which leads to a greater amount of readership, which helps to increase the impact of your research. That's not to say you don't need to do the work on promoting and increasing the discoverability of your work, which is what the next speakers will talk about, but hopefully it's that first step in making sure that people, once they've discovered it, can get access, read, and put your work into practice and have that impact that you're looking for. When it comes to measuring it, that's what we call bibliometrics, and we start looking there at what the usage of articles and journals looks like and measuring those. So touching on some of the details on this slide, it's about providing metrics around your work and being able to measure that. Traditionally, and the figure that most people will be aware of is impact factor, which is a journal level metric. It's one metric that's based on the number of citations over the number of articles that are published. So the average citation rate of a journal and its published research. But what we're finding now is that it's a very narrow metric. And certainly where we talk about individual level, individual author level, and individual article level, it's a poor substitute for more granular data about the impact of that research. So increasingly, and as part of the DORA initiative, which Wiley have signed on to, we're moving away from focusing on impact as the be-all and impact factor as the be-all and end-all metric, and trying to have a more balanced metric, a balanced basket of metrics around both journals and individual pieces of research themselves. What this looks like is a whole range now, and there's no shortage of metrics that we can use to measure the impact of research. We still do take impact factor into consideration, but we're aware of what it actually focuses on. The range of other metrics that are listed on this page all have different nuances and different things that they're measuring. So looking at different ways of measuring citation impact, whether those are weighted, whether those are normalized against other journals and within disciplines and subject areas, but also looking at author-focused metrics as well. When we talk about the impact of a journal, it may not always be about citations. You can see we're starting to include more about publication times. So submission to first decision, that time before you get a first decision as an author, that's pretty important. That means that you can then progress to the next stage of your work. You know whether you're getting published, you know whether you should be looking instead at resubmitting to another journal. So we're surfacing those metrics a little bit more. And importantly, for both journal and article level, we're looking at readership as well. So we're looking at surfacing how many times an article's downloaded, how many times it's read, how many times it's had the opportunity to make an impact within the target audience. And that's where we look at the crossover between the journal level and the article level. That's headed up by full text views. Citations are still important at an article level, and that may differ versus impact factor, because you may be the highest cited paper in a low impact journal. And that means that you can surface that success metric independent of the impact factor of a journal. Alt metrics is a great way of capturing the non-citation impact of a journal. And I've highlighted a couple of the areas that that alt metrics as an organization cover in terms of media, patterns, policy, social media. And I'll show a few examples of this to finish up. But where we look at the idea of published research having different impacts, particularly in an area such as this, where it's not always a research impact that your work might be having. Your work might not be cited, but it might fundamentally change the way that people in practice work, that procedures are done, that patients interact with professionals in the area. That might not bring citations, but it still has that real world impact. It might dramatically change the way that the public view the discipline as well, in terms of how many media mentions and patient relations are influenced. That we try to look at through the alt metrics lens and see if we can find that impact as well. And finally, open science. We know that open access is one part of the open science push, and it's all about making research more reproducible, more accessible, more transparent, preserving integrity through available interrogation of research results. So being able to surface whether an article is available open access, whether it has open data, even to the extent of peer review information being made open. These are also aspects of a journal article that we can surface to show readers there's more to this article than what you might have initially seen, and to help them compare and contrast with other articles. These metrics also allow us to celebrate success as well, and rather than just focusing on a journal level high impact, you can see that on the right hand side we're able to acknowledge individual authors. So whether we are looking at the most cited authors that contribute to an impact factor and citation impact, or whether in this case we're celebrating the most read authors. It gives us a chance to broaden what we classify as success and what we should be highlighting from the journal. On the article page, I've blurred out the background for this particular article as it appears on the Wiley site, but I've left highlighted the metrics box that that starts to bring some of these individual article level metrics to the fore. And this isn't something that we've had available easily in the past. So in this example, you can see that we're bringing up the number of citations, the full text views that this article's received, as well as the alt metric score. And again, I'll dwell on what those colors and things mean in a sec. But with this in mind, you can then, as you're reading through an article, you have a much better idea about the impact that this may have had. How well read has it been? What are the citations? There's also the ability to click through to the citing articles as well, so you can track where those citations are coming from, but also through to the alt metric results. So you can see where this has been mentioned, what impact it's actually having, and where the conversation is. And what I'll finish on with this slide is looking at what alt metrics tracks and what we're able to surface outside of those citation metrics that I keep coming back to. You can see with the article on the left-hand side, this is one that's been picked up by news outlets, an online blog, but it's also had policy impact. And what we see that altmetric is able to track is policy documents themselves. We're able to see where research is tabled in parliamentary sessions through altmetrics. We're able to see where research is having a direct impact on the world, on policy and practice, that may not be captured purely by citations. The middle one's a good example of different aspects, because this looks at patents and Wikipedia pages as well. So where we think of JMIRO as having technical information and research, that may have direct commercial application as well. And again, something that's never been able to be captured before altmetrics, by monitoring patent submissions, we're able to see journal impact there too. Wikipedia is a quiet but important thing to measure as well. We know that readership of Wikipedia is massive, and as often, as much as we don't necessarily want it to be in the research world, is often the first place, the first stop that people will go as they learn about a topic or as they do their 101 research on a new area. So being able to influence people through being mentioned in Wikipedia and having research impact that first impression is actually a bit of an understated measure of impact as well. Finally, on the right-hand side, we see mainstream news coming into effect, and the social media as well, by tracking X users. Altmetric, not shown here, but we also look at Facebook as well, Facebook mentions, and just seeing, well, what discussion has this journal, has this article been involved in? And also clicking through on the altmetric site, you'll be able to see exactly where those posts are and what that discussion has been. Now, each of these scores is weighted slightly differently, which gives rise to the main score at the top. And as you can probably notice from the aggregate scores here, the weighting goes in favor of mainstream news. So those 6 news outlet mentions for the right-hand article will have led to its overall higher score. But certainly there's nuance into looking at where all those mentions have come from. And I think this is worth considering as we move on to the next speakers, where we talk about social media promotion, where we talk about mainstream news promotion and engaging media units and those kind of things. How do we measure that? And how is this all underpinned by the accessibility that publishing open access allows for? So I'll finish there. I think that's my time. I look forward to Q&A at the end, and I look forward to perhaps revisiting these topics in light of the other presenters and what they go through over the next hour or so. So again, thank you, and yeah, looking forward to any questions that people might have. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Simon. And can I reiterate what Simon said? Please put your questions in the questions box on your control panel. I think your presentation, Simon, raises quite a number of issues, quite a few I wasn't really aware of, so I look forward to the Q&A. So we'll move on to our next speaker. Our next speaker is Dr. Vigneswara Atumrai. She is a principal research scientist and now works for the Georgia Institute in Sydney. She very kindly has been the one of the 2 social media editors for JMIRO over the last 5 years. She's done a wonderful job with Dr. Mark Beckett in promoting the journal. She's got extensive research and clinical experience in radiotherapy and a strong focus on the practical applications of research outcomes. And unsurprisingly, Vicky is going to talk to us about social media for researchers. Thank you, Vicky.
Thanks, Michael. Welcome, everyone. Today, I've been asked to talk about how social media platforms can be used to support your professional profile and make a scientific impact. So most people know what social media is, but we'll start with the basic today. Social media includes a wide range of platforms and each offering unique opportunities for communication and knowledge dissemination. So from Twitter to YouTube, these platforms provide avenues for clinicians and scientists to engage with the peers and the public. And whether it's sharing insights from the latest research findings, engaging in discussions on healthcare trends, or providing educational content, these platforms facilitate meaningful dialogue within the scientific community and beyond to the public. So why use social media? It offers multiple benefits for clinicians and scientists. First off, social media can boost your professional profile and serve as a platform for advocating scientific causes. Whether you're tweeting groundbreaking discoveries or blogging about your latest research, several studies have shown that tweeting and blogging about scientific findings can increase their impact. But social media isn't just about self-promotion, it's also about fostering a vibrant online presence. By engaging with peers and the wider community, you're not only amplifying your voice, but also contributing to the open science and collaboration. So creating impact through social media involves leveraging these platforms to engage with the communities. So for example, let's consider a conversation about the vaccine and cervical cancer here. This particular post has garnered significant attention, receiving 16,000 likes and reaching over 500,000 users. And this example shows the potential reach and influence that social media offers in initiating discussions. And by leveraging such interactions, scientists and clinicians can effectively share their expertise. And what is the impact for you for sharing your own research? Studies have shown a strong association between social media exposure and increased citation rates for journal articles. Tweets especially have been found to be predictive of highly cited papers within the first 3 days of publication, and highlighting the benefit of social media engagement for scientists. So share your article as soon as it's published. And if you notice someone else has shared your work, remember to engage with their posts. You can retweet their posts and add your own insights or comments. And just going back to what Simon mentioned earlier about altmetric factors, all this re-engaging and retweeting will improve that factor. And looking at this paper on the growth of the global radiation oncology Twitter network, there are several highlights. The study found that there is opportunity on social media to learn from other clinicians and from people with cancer sharing their experiences. Majority of trainees agreed that social media exposed them to novel educational content. And interestingly, the use of #radon by non-clinicians is increasing. And this could be due to non-clinicians simply retweeting content and more people following radiation oncologists. And this serves as an indication that clinicians are effectively reaching people and organizations beyond the traditional sphere of influence. But simply having a social media account is not sufficient to make an impact. It's important to know how to use it. And the following quote is taken from the paper reference here. Online social media tools can be some of the most rewarding and information resources for scientists if you know how to use them. So let's take a look at some ways for maximizing your impact on these platforms. So before getting into social media, it's important to clarify your objectives and consider what you aim to achieve. Are you seeking increased citations for your papers or increased visibility for your research? Or are you looking for a platform for expressing opinions, opportunities for collaborations, or science communication to a broader audience? Clarifying these objectives will serve as a compass and guide effective social media engagement. And it can also be helpful to get to know the different platforms. You don't have to start accounts on every single social media site, but start by picking one. Get comfortable with that before trying to build your social media profile. So looking at X or Twitter is an easy way to connect with diverse people in your field, and you're able to share information and follow news in real time. LinkedIn is a professional and career-focused platform. It allows for a wide range of content, so you can be flexible. And Facebook is a familiar platform for most people and easy to navigate. But if your Facebook connections are non-scientists, links to journals are not going to interest many people. So think about the platforms. And blogging provides you with a regular and longer format for talking about your research. And it works really well when it's promoted through other social media. So a good starting point when first exploring social media is to follow accounts that are relevant to your interests and engage with content aligned with your research. Some examples here include JMIRO journal, radiation oncologists, radiologists, and interventional radiologists who are passionate about science communication. Find people who fit your target audience, follow them, and start commenting and sharing their material. And over time, you will build relationship which should lead to more engagement on your posts. And when people comment on your posts, be sure to respond. And maintaining scientific accuracy and rigor is important when sharing research findings on social media. It's useful to include a link to the original research paper and ensure proper attribution to images, statistics, and quotes. And aim to be concise in your posts, but try to avoid buzzwords that can be misleading. And just some tips here that can be useful for any platform. Some platform like Twitter has limited character counts, so use them wisely. But sometimes we need more than one post to explain our research. So in this case, threads are your best friend. A thread is a series of connected posts where you can provide additional context, updates, or extended points. And shorten those URLs. Link shorteners can be handy tools. They reduce character count for social media sharing and make URLs more user-friendly and memorable for your audience. And don't forget the hashtag in your posts. Using hashtags is essentially a way to group together conversations or content around a certain topic and making it easy for people to find the content. Think of them as keywords if you like. And tag relevant accounts to amplify your reach. When you tag someone, you include their username, creating a link to their profile and informing them about the post. Tags will encourage engagement from other users and will boost the reach of your posts. And you might be wondering, but what if I don't have enough time? So managing time and maintaining a healthy balance with social media engagement is essential. It's perfectly okay to not always keep up to date. In fact, it's important to take breaks from social media. Post when you're inspired and passionate about the topic. Create your own routine that works for you. You might choose to engage daily or once a week. And consider leveraging social media scheduling tools to streamline your posting routine. These tools not only save time, but also allow you to reach your audience at optimal times and maximizing your impact across the platforms. And as we wrap up, remember to take control of your social media presence, find your balance, and prioritize your time wisely. I'll finish up here. Thank you for joining us today. And if you have any questions or would like to continue the discussion, please feel free to reach out.
Thank you for a very interesting talk. I have, again, a number of questions, but like everybody, we'll have to hold them till the end. Can I remind everybody to use the questions box for their questions, and we'll go through them at the end. And next speaker is Karen Moscow, Moscow. She's a clinical librarian and education lead at Monash Health. She's committed to delivering high-quality health information to support patient care, education and research, and she has a focus on training and education programs in evidence-based practice, research skills, research promotion, which is great for our webinar today, and library skills. She's going to talk about how to set up a research profile and why you should, and a very quick introduction on the access to those metrics tools that Simon introduced in his talk earlier. So thank you very much, Karen.
Okay, thank you very much. You should be able to see my title slide there. Let me know if you can't. But thank you very much for having me here today, and I'm really excited to talk to you about how to sort of get your name out there as part of becoming early or mid-career researchers. My name's Karen, as mentioned, and I'm a clinical librarian joining you today. Okay, so what is your research profile and what it can do for you? So just sort of a high level here, it's an individual profile of your research output. So basically it's a way of establishing your digital profile, which can then be used to assist your research endeavours. So you don't want to miss an opportunity because someone, for example, is interested in your work but is not really sure who you are, or perhaps if there's a person with a similar name as you, or you've changed your name and they're unable to find you. So you're able to use it in a variety of different ways, obviously to consolidate your research in one place so that all your research outputs, whether they be papers or conference posters or visual abstracts or any other forms or videos that you've created, can be placed in one area. They also help to identify you, as mentioned, if there's people with multiple names or changing of names. It also helps you to helps people to collaborate with you. So people may want to be searching for researchers to work with on a particular topic. And of course, your researcher profiles list various areas and fields of interest that obviously can be filtered through using different profile platforms to then find people with similar interests. It's also a really great way and also an important aspect of applying for grants, for example, or if you are looking for jobs or promotions and you might want to choose to attach your profile so that people can get an overview of your work. So where can you build your online profile? There's a variety of different ways. I'm really concentrating today on where you can freely create a researcher profile, just so that it's accessible to all. One thing is really to have a think about where you are, and particularly around your institution and where organisation that you're at. Many institutions have research repositories, which is a great way to sort of have a look at local peers' work and also place yourself within a local sphere. They're often connected with a particular department or field within that institution. And I've just popped on the screen ones that I sort of, dip into at my local level here. So for example, Monash Health has a research repository for Monash Health research output, but of course things like University of Melbourne, Monash University, and many, many other institutions have research repositories. You can see here that they can be at various levels of research input. Monash University, for example, has a dedicated publication, My Research Space, as well as one called Bridges, which is for data or non-traditional outputs. So it's worth just investigating that. It can help you because it really opens up. Research repositories are generally open access. They are globally accessible, so people can find you from all around the world. You're able to track your research, and of course, it's a very local sphere, so you're able to look locally for collaborators or have people find you. So one of the ones that obviously I think everybody will be familiar with is an ORCID ID, and this is probably the one that I would highly recommend the most. It is a persistent 16-digit identifier. That means that it is absolutely connected to your name, and it's not going to be, it'll be easily distinguishable to your name. It's absolutely free to register. It's very easy to navigate. So once you're in there, you're able to pop in details around your employment, around your education and qualifications, as well as, of course, your research output. And you're able to add your works to this in a variety of different ways. So the first way on the screen here to add works is to search and link. And that's our recommended. It takes a little bit of setting up, but it's worth doing it because it's a little bit of a set and forget type tool in this instance. You can set up and search a link, for example, with Scopus database, with a Lens database, with DataCite, plus a range of other databases. Basically, once that's set up, you any publications that are brought into, for example, the Scopus database will automatically be linked to your ID. So you don't have to then manually go in and add your works each time you publish. But of course, you can also add based on a DOI that you have attached to a paper or a PubMed ID that's of one of your papers. You can upload a citations, for example, through BibTeX, or you can actually just go in and manually enter the details of your publication, as well as including any affiliations that you might have and affiliated authors. So this is a really helpful one to consolidate your research. Highly recommended if you don't have one to go ahead and do it, or if you do have an ORCID account, like myself, but maybe preach to the choir here, is make sure that you maintain it. So check that your research output is up to date within that. Potentially, if you've got any other changes of contact details or qualifications, or of course, employment details. Publishers and funders and institutions are increasingly requesting an ORCID ID as part of that process. So as a classic example, the National Health and Medical Research Council has a Sapphire system, which is part of the grant application process, and you're able to use your ORCID ID to upload works as part of that grant application, which of course is a really great way to promote yourself in that area. Obviously, we talked about distinguishing your ORCID being a persistent identifier, and you can just see here, for example, if you had a very common name, then you would able to be recognizable by using that persistent identifier, and of course, listing those affiliations and organizations that you work with. So you would not necessarily have your works confused with another person of the same name. Another tool is the Google Scholar Profile. This lists your publications, particularly by cited by data. So Simon talked about that cited data. It can be a count. It also has its own I-10 index. I'll talk about that in a minute. It's free, but you do need a Google account to obviously create it. And it's really easy to do. Once you're on Google Scholar, you just go to the My Profile tab and then enter your details and go through your application registration process. Super simple. It's really helpful because I guess it's a widely used platform. It's very familiar as well. It might be something that people hit upon without really looking for you, and therefore it increases your impact that way, as well as, of course, have people being able to see all of your works in one place. And it provides some key metrics that are quite familiar to people who are using metrics to sort of benchmark, or not benchmark, to look at impact on particular individual articles. So this is an example, for example, of someone at Monash that we've worked with. And it's a list of the citations. Cited by data is per individual article level, but of course at profile level, you're able to get an author level H index or an I-10 index. As I said, I'll mention that. And it also, of course, is handy to see which articles are available or not available, and just sort of thinking again about those open access, important of open access publication and the availability of papers for people to really for you to communicate your research. Another key one is a Scopus preview author profile. This is freely available, so even if you don't have access to the Scopus database through your institution, you are able to create an author profile, or you're able to claim your profile, because any papers that you have already that are sitting within the Scopus database will automatically generate an author profile. It's important for you to go in and just to double check that information about you is correct, and just make sure that all the details or all the works that are attributed to you are in fact accurate. It helps in this instance because it is able to be, as I said, connected to ORCID. So you're really sort of getting bang for your buck by having a connection with these. It also has a look at things like citation counts and also a H index. And it also has some benchmarking metrics as well. We'll just have a quick look at that. So for example, this is an example of an author profile. You can see that this particular author has 17 documents sitting within Scopus, and there is a total of 188 citations for these documents, and that the overall H index for this author is 6. And on the right-hand side, you can see that there are also, I've popped in here, field-weighted citation impact, which is a benchmarking style citation. So it's not looking at total raw numbers or H indexes. It's taking into account, for example, the field of publication in this instance. But wait, there's more. I just wanted to touch on quickly here that there are many different tools and platforms that enable you to create a research profile in this digital research a footprint for yourself. ResearchGate is another one that you may be quite familiar with. Again, these are all very intuitive to set profiles up. So just wanted to mention them as options for you. ResearchGate Mendeley, you're able to create a free profile on Mendeley. And also mentioned earlier was LinkedIn as a possible social media and influential social media tool. And that, of course, is not a profile, but I thought I'd mention it here as just an option for getting your information out there. So, of course, you know, these are just a few on top of the ones that we've already talked about earlier, including your institutional repository if you had one. But of course, you know, there's a lot. What do we recommend in terms of managing your digital profiles? So things to consider. So what is the purpose of you creating why are you wanting a profile? And that can be different for different people. If you're, for example, wanting solely to look at things like and to consolidate your outputs and have it manage itself, then of course ORC would be a classic example here. Citation count, collaboration are all considerations that you might want to take into account. Collaboration and institutional repositories, for example, go well together. Which profiles are relevant to you? Is there, for example, profiles that are basically aligned to where your publications are sitting? And also just think about how many you want to maintain. I wouldn't recommend setting up 10 different profiles. Think about what's reasonable and what has the biggest impact for your time. Just speaking about impact, I'll just touch on this because it has been spoken about earlier, but assessing your research impact obviously has to do with your research metrics. And of course, we've talked about how these are these quantitative measurements, and there is a huge variety, as we saw from Simon's slide, of the different kind of citation and bibliometric metrics out there. I just wanted to touch on the ones that are here at the library we probably get asked about the most. They're not necessarily always part, I've not necessarily chosen ones that are always available to everyone here, but I wanted to touch on the ones that we get questions about the most, and also the ones that are kind of more associated with or might be present in something like a research profile, as we're talking about today. I'll just touch on this because obviously this has been talked about. It's important to assess your research impact because of course you want to be able to use whatever metrics that you have to be able to attach to a profile or to grant applications. For example, what is your H index could be something that is asked of you as part of a review of your impact. And of course you might want to benchmark yourself against others within your field. So traditional metrics, for example, bibliometrics could be at citation article level, and these are the ones I think that we're probably most familiar with. So how many times your output has been cited by others, it's the classic one. This can grow over time. So obviously a paper that has been around longer or has had perhaps more interaction on social media will have higher citations, and you can find these in many places. So as we saw earlier, JMIRO has a tab. If you go to that information tab, you're able to see citation metrics based on an article level. But I just wanted to pop up here, it's a different article, but just to make sure that you do check more than one art in our database. So this is an article on liver stiffness, and if you viewed this in Google Scholar in the cited by tab, or in Scopus in the citation tab, there's a difference of 2. So cited by 7 people or cited by 5 people. And that's because of where people are accessing or where this is being registered in which database. So it's good to have a look. And, you know, if you are presenting a citation score on a particular article, then choose the highest one. If you're assessing your impact as a whole, so your author level impact, then of course we're looking at things like H-index. So H-index is, I said, again, not always the most recommended, but it is the one that is talked about a lot. So I just wanted to clarify, what does it mean at author level? Basically, it's measuring your quality and quantity. So for example, a H-index of 3 means that out of all of your publications, 3 publications have been cited at least 3 times. An example here, H-index of 8 means that out of all of these 15 publications by a particular author, 8 papers have been cited more than 8 times. So even though number 8 on the publication rank has 10 citations, number 7 has 19 citations, there's quite a few sitting below that at 7, 7, 6, 2, 2, 1, 1. So we have a minimum of 8 papers cited more than 8 times. Can be confusing, but that's a good way to have a look at it when you have a think about something that has been cited a minimum of a certain amount of times. You can find it in various places. Google Scholar has it, Scopus, Web of Science, it's quite freely available. Again, just have a look at where you're searching it, because the same researcher may have 2 different H scores, just the same as citations, depending on where it is held. Google Scholar, this particular researcher has a H-index of 10 in Google Scholar, but a H-index of 9. And again, it's how it's being calculated within the databases. Check across sites. It's not always a good metric for early researchers, because of course you need time for these to develop. It's as a whole metric. I-10 is something that is talked about. This is purely a Google metric, and I-10 is where you've had 3 papers cited at least 10 times. So this is going to be a measure of somebody who has multiple papers published at high influence, and where you find it is on Google Scholar profile. So just sort of keep that in mind. These are bandied around a bit. It's always important to have a look. Of course, raw numbers are also a classic example. How many papers in total have you published? And how many citations in total are across? You could use raw numbers as well. Consideration, we're not going to delve into this here because it is a pretty in-depth topic, but just an extra consideration that we haven't touched on yet are normalized metrics. So this is where there's a sort of a benchmarking or an attempt to use a formula or a weighted formula or weighted algorithm to even out the numbers so that you can compare one article from one field to another without having to sort of have to really think about how you're going to compare yourself perhaps from a different field. So for example, citation benchmarking, example percentiles. So in a particular research field, where does it sit within that? So a 99th percentile, an article is in the top 1%, or we saw this in Scopus, the field weighted citation impact, where a formula is used to take into consideration the research area, the expected citations for that research area, and it gives it a score. Usually it's out of 1, and then if anything's below 1, it's tracking below average for that area, and if it's above 1, it's tracking above average. And these are usually found within subscription databases, so you might not necessarily always see them just as part of sort of something that you'll see on a journal page. Altmetrics we looked at, so I don't think I need to delve into the reasons why we have that. That's been done quite extensively, but just in terms of the tools, so PlumX is one of the main altmetrics that are used here. So you're able to view this very, very clear visual when you're looking at different journal pages. For example, you might see it on a Scopus search or a science science direct search on a journal page. Of course, also various other journals where you can see that. And really what you're looking at is you can just hover over the particular infographic there that will be on the page, and then you can see the individual numbers of, if it mentions social media, citations, usage, captures, various things like that. It's a really, really easy metric to look at and to get a quick snapshot of that non-traditional altmetric metric. And the other tool is, of course, altmetric. Don't be confused. Altmetrics in general is the name of looking at non-traditional bibliometric data, but altmetric is also the name of a tool. This one looks like a donut, and each color on the donut shows a particular source of attention, whether it be Facebook, blogs, Google, YouTube, Wikipedia, etc. And then you'll get an attention score or weighted score based on the total of these. Again, you can see these as part of entries within different journals. You can also install a free bookmarklet so that it'll pop up on, on a particular page if you're looking at it, particularly if you were on PubMed or Google Scholar-friendly sort of articles with DOIs, and you might, if you've got this bookmarklet installed as an extension, this little graphic will pop up, and then you're able to click on it and get a breakdown of what each of those parts of the donut looks like. So that is it. Just some different tools to help you not only set up a profile for yourself online, but then also what kind of metrics are going to be potentially used to draw into that profile and at your individual article level as well. So key takeaways and things to consider for moving forward. Create a researcher profile if you haven't. If you have, go in and review it and check that everything is there and is accurate. And I would recommend ORCID as a first start for that if you haven't done that already. Have a think about the different metrics that are, and review your author and article metrics, and have a think about how you may want to present them or how best to present them if you are applying for grants or looking at job applications, for example. Highlight your best metrics, look at the variety of sources where they are. If you have a higher citation count on one particular database than another, go ahead with that. And then if you need extra help, talk to somebody, speak to a librarian at your or a research leads at your institutions to get extra information, because particularly around things like altmetrics, it's out there and you want to be ahead of the game to make sure that your research is discoverable, that you're discoverable, and that you're having the best opportunities that you can moving forward. So thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Very informative. I've just gone and checked my ORCID profile. One thing I would like to share with everybody is that the H index isn't the great measure of your impact, because it keeps going up after you die. So it's just one of those things. It measures the citations of your paper, but not your current activity or anything else.
Yeah,
so,
it's definitely on the way out, but it's on the way out, but good to know what it is.
So questions, again, please put them in the questions section on your control panel, and we'll move on to the next talk, which is using research for advocacy by the Master of Research Advocacy, Dr. Lucinda Morris, who's a radiation oncologist at St George Cancer Care Centre in Sydney. She is the co-chair of Targeting Cancer, an award-winning internationally recognised public awareness campaign on access to radiation therapy worldwide. It has an estimated global audience of over 150 million people. So Lucinda is going to talk to us about using research advocacy. Sorry, using research for advocacy. Thank you, Lucinda.
Thank you, Michael. Just to double check, is my screen sharing?
It is, but you just need to make it full screen, Lucinda. But we can see your slide.
Now?
Yeah, perfect.
Ah, fantastic. If my audio goes a bit funny, please let me know, and I'll turn my camera off. I think the internet's a little bit glitchy here. So Thank you, Michael, for the introduction. And hello, everybody online. As mentioned, outside, I've been very involved in
Lucinda,
various
sorry,
aspects of the target.
Yeah, okay, perfect. You turned your camera off.
Okay.
No problem.
If I lose my, yeah, has that improved it, Sarah?
Yes, yeah. I think so. Do you want to start talking again?
Fantastic, thank you. I'll start talking again and just interrupt me if not. So as Michael mentioned, I'm currently chair of Targeting Cancer, and it's in that capacity that I'm here today to take you on a whirlwind tour of the Targeting Cancer campaign, specifically exploring how we've used social and traditional media as a core strategy, and share with you some of the key learnings from this that may in turn be helpful for you in promoting your research. I guess a couple of disclaimers before I start. I am not a social media expert. It takes me 25 minutes to write a tweet, and I always have a typo once I post it. And also, Targeting Cancer obviously is not a dedicated research organisation, but we do work very closely with and collaborate with research organisations such as TROG, and a vast majority of our content is of course grounded in best practice, evidence-based research. So I feel that we're the same corporation but a different division, and of course we all share the same goal, which is that patients get the best care possible. So the take-home messages today are that we all can and should use social and traditional media wherever possible to raise the profile of radiation therapy or radiology, to educate and advocate vital treatments. And this, of course, applies to all research as well around these specialties. And secondly, to say there really is nothing more powerful than real patient stories in conveying messages across all media. So no matter how compelling our technology, our science, our trial results, if it isn't coupled with real patient stories as told by them, the potential impact and reach outside of our bubble can potentially fall short. So just to take a step back and set the scene for targeting cancer and what is it and why does it exist, we know that radiotherapy is significantly underutilised and undervalued worldwide. In Australia and New Zealand, its use is well below evidence-based benchmarks, and in other parts of the world, it's far less or none. And a shout out to Michael Barton and his team for the incredible work he did over the years in defining these important benchmarks through research. And of course, this underutilisation is the cause of much needless death and suffering. And this is because radiotherapy lacks the profile of other cancer treatments. It's plagued by myths and misconceptions that it's a dangerous, difficult and inferior treatment. And there's a real lack of community awareness about radiation therapy, inadequate education of healthcare professionals about it, and suboptimal referral pathways. And this in turn leads to poor government investment in radiotherapy services and research. So as brutal as it may sound, when looking to promote your research to a wider community-based audience, or even within the medical profession, I would argue that we need to work off the assumption that most people don't understand radiotherapy and maybe don't even care about it. And it's your role as a researcher to make them understand and make them care. And I think this applies to indeed anything radiation related, and that includes, of course, medical imaging. So back in 2013, RANZCO identified the underutilisation of radiotherapy as a critical issue negatively impacting patients. So in 2014, the Targeting Cancer campaign was launched, and it is a not-for-profit public awareness campaign to improve the profile of radiation therapy across Australia and New Zealand, but with a global reach. So since day one, Targeting Cancer has purposefully endeavoured to use this communications framework across all our social and traditional media advocacy work, in which we have prospectively been very clear about our objectives, messages, audience and the use of patient stories, because these elements really are critical in promoting and disseminating any information really. And before you attempt anything, even a simple tweet, I would argue you must be really clear in advance about who, what, and the why of your content. So from the Targeting Cancer perspective, our objectives are to raise awareness and recognition of radiotherapy in the community, and to demystify it as a treatment option, ensure all patients know their treatment options by seeing a radiation oncologist, and with a long-term goal that by improving the profile and understanding of radiation oncology, consumer demand increase, and this in turn leads to increased resources and funding into the sector, both in terms of research and service provision. And that, of course, will then improve patient access to radiotherapy. Our key campaign messages are that 1 in 2 cancer patients would benefit from radiotherapy. Radiotherapy is safe, effective and cost effective, and it's delivered by a highly skilled professional team using sophisticated technology. We're also really clear about our audience. That's the general community, consumers or patients and their loved ones, healthcare professionals, in particular GPs, and the government. And what you can see here is a multifaceted strategy on how Targeting Cancer works to achieve our objectives, which includes the website, our binational GP and medical student education programs, dedicated prostate cancer advocacy, developing collaborations and partnerships with peak national and international organisations, institutions and individuals, and of course collaborating with patients and patient ambassadors, including our phenomenal ambassador, Julie McCrossan, who is a high-profile Australian journalist and TV personality, and also a head and neck cancer survivor and patient advocate. And all these domains are very interrelated, and social and traditional media play a key role across all these areas of work. The targeting, we're very selective in which platforms we would be active on. As Vicky mentioned earlier, they all have individual purposes and modalities, and we felt that these were the most appropriate for targeting cancer. Since the campaign launch, Targeting Cancer has also worked to promote many traditional media stories across radio, TV and print, either celebrating innovations and positive patient stories or highlighting care gaps, and here are but a few examples. Noting that traditional media these days is inextricably linked to social media, and rarely will there be a piece that doesn't dovetail on a media organisation's social media feed with a traditional media story. So again, I'm reiterating what Vicky went over earlier. Why did we want to use social media? Well, back in 2014, when we launched, we had very strong advice that social media would be critical to our impact. Worldwide, there's 7 billion smartphones, so that's nearly 90% of the world's population. And on average, people spend about 2.5 hours on social media today. And if you're a teenager, it's up to 9 or 10 hours or more. And this reach and the nature of the medium means it has the key ability to promote messages and positioning, have a two-way relationship in building communities, and can be more impactful than a website alone, and allows you to bring people to longer form content to increase knowledge and understanding. And of course, this is perfect for promoting research. There are so many choices across social media platforms and advantages and disadvantages of each. We thought very carefully about our audience, as I mentioned, and who we were targeting, knowing that cancer affects almost everybody, but also taking into consideration that it commonly occurs in older adults, slightly more, or more men than women, a higher prevalence outside metro areas. And we knew in Australia we had gaps in prostate cancer treatment for radiotherapy. And we also knew from pretty robust research that other than men themselves with cancer, when it comes to online research, advocacy, and choosing a treatment pathway, wives and daughters were also very influential. So that was really helpful for us in picking our platforms. So in all our media strategy and content, I cannot emphasise enough the sheer power of the patient story. We have always endeavoured to make patient stories the central theme, and that's because patient stories resonate, they are impactful and they matter. And the human, I've said this many times before, the human brain is wired to remember stories. So in terms of reaching the general public, once people hear Julie McCrossan's head and neck cancer story, they remember it for years to come. But if I talk about, as a radiation oncologist how I used VMAT technique to target the PTV and minimize the Dmax on spinal cord, etc., etc., trust me, most people listening will not remember that. So I would encourage you to always be thinking about how you can partner with patients in promoting your research, as their stories and experiences will often have more impact to a wider audience than your graphs or your p-values. I'm sorry, but that is often the truth. So just to demonstrate this point, targeting cancer is particularly active and impactful on Twitter, or as X we call it these days. And here you can see a snapshot of our Twitter community called a mention map, and the lines represent communications and the nodes are individual users. So the interesting point is that the red dots are users with over 1,000 followers, of which we have several hundred. And this is an important statistic and one for you to take into account when you're on Twitter yourself. I guess the social media skeptic may ask, well, what's really the point of all this Twitter activity or X activity if we're just preaching to the choir rather than singing it from the rooftops? Aren't we just talking to ourselves, which has a name, it's called InReach, rather than actually reaching a broader non-scientific audience or government or media or decision makers, which is known as outreach? However, there's really good data to show that when scientists and researchers reach a threshold of beyond 1,000 followers, the range of follower types becomes a lot more diverse, including research and education organisations, media, consumers and decision makers, which in turn has been shown to result in an exponential increase in the reach, your social media reach. So we think our targeting cancer social media reach is real and it's relevant and it grows. And the next thing is our top 20 users, who are a really diverse group of radiation oncology professionals, organisations from all over the globe. And what I think is fabulous is that by far our biggest influencer is a consumer, our phenomenal Julie McCrossan, who, as I've said, works tirelessly as our campaign ambassador and is simply a force in nature. And she drives so much engagement on social media as a head neck cancer survivor and never tires of shouting from the rooftops that radiation therapy saved her voice and saved her life. So as I outlined earlier, our communications framework focuses on defining our objectives, aims, audience, and patient stories. And so to demonstrate this in action, I'm going to take you through a more recent example to show you how all the elements of a media campaign fit together. Last year for World Cancer Day, we told the story of Ashley, who has had brachytherapy for cervical cancer. Our focus on brachytherapy was intentional. Government funding here in Australia has been slashed for brachytherapy programs, and data projections show that women who will most be affected are Indigenous women living in regional and remote areas. So we defined our objectives for this campaign, which is to raise awareness and build understanding of brachytherapy, and also to raise the profile of the Targeting Cancer website. And our key messages were very clearly defined. Brachytherapy is vital, access and equity need improving, particularly in Indigenous and remote populations, and that the Targeting Cancer website is a trusted source of information. So during the run into World Cancer Day, our website and social media account took on a themed look to demonstrate our support for World Cancer Day, and then Ashley's story went live on the website on World Cancer Day itself. And this was all coupled with a social media content calendar, which focused on Ashley's story and brachytherapy and was really rich with visual content and built anticipation around the release of her story on the day itself. Ashley's story was also published on the World Cancer Day website, where the Targeting Cancer website link was embedded, which increased the visibility of the campaign at a global level. We pitched the story to journalists and reporters, and it generated a lot of interest and landed 2 radio interviews and 2 media stories with fantastic reach. And you can see that reach here, and I think those figures have gone up. These are actually much more right now. So as you can see, this was really putting a framework in action, which was defining our objective messages and audience stories and examples through Ashley. And again, I will say, when looking to promote your research across social or traditional media, before you attempt anything, even if it's a tweet, just a simple tweet about your research, you've got to be clear in advance about the who, the what, and the why of that content. So in regards to research specifically, Targeting Cancer has of course worked hard to promote positive stories about research in radiation oncology around innovations, technology and highlighting gaps. And here are some examples. And the key lesson is that radiotherapy has a really good story to tell, and we've found that journalists are really interested in stories about patients benefiting from new innovations or where things can be done better. We have definitely learned a lot of lessons over the years from dealing with media and journalists and working alongside media experts like Julie McCrossan. Some of the hot tips and tricks that you may find helpful if you're ever looking to promote your research in the media are, firstly, deliver journos the golden triangle, and that is the exciting innovation or finding from your research, a patient to tell their own story about how this may have helped them or has helped them, and couple this with a clinician expert to speak to it. And a note about journalists in 2024, in years gone by, journalists were often dedicated to sub areas like finance, crime, health. Now they are all almost always generalised. There are very few dedicated health journalists out there, and many that you might be dealing with have pretty poor health expertise or low health expertise and
Hi everyone. I'm not sure if you can hear me. I just completely lost Lucinda's audio there. Lucinda, can you hear us?
As we have all learnt recently, the media often operates at two extremes to evoke audience interest. Either the stories are focused on drama, being to blame or the person to blame, like Kate's photo, or it can go to the other end of the spectrum around the feel-good, inspiring, overcoming the odds type of stories, as we saw on the weekend with Kate coming out with her cancer diagnosis. And it's worth being aware that journalists will want to categorise what you're pitching them into one of these two extremes. And I think as doctors or researchers, we often risk shying away from these, wringing our hands and worrying that we're being falsely optimistic, or we're worried about generating conflict or upsetting people. But look, if your research is truly addressing a care need or inequity for patients and correcting this, and it's the right thing, then I'd encourage you to get comfortable with these two dichotomies and make them work for you rather than against you. I'd also just put out a word of warning that radiotherapy or anything to do with radiation often tends to fall into the negative category, as shown by this recent front page article from the New York Times, a headline which really badly misrepresented radiotherapy and the results of the trial. There was huge outcry about this from the radon sector globally, and so the New York Times issued a kind of amendment, as you can see underneath, but I really don't think that went far enough. So just be aware that the media are quite happy to fuel fear, and radiation can be an easy target, so keep this in mind. You're always going to be up against this if your research is about anything to do with radiation. So in terms of partnering with patients, some other key tips. There are just so many ways to do it. We can do it across all elements of a media platform. We can do this with formally trained consumers. For instance, we have one on our Targeting Cancer Committee, or informally with patients you meet in the clinic or through your research. Patients can be a one-off champion for a specific finite piece, or work as a long-term official partner, as Julie does for us. There are so many very powerful patient and consumer groups and organisations out there who are keen to work with clinicians and researchers, so find them. They're often online. And obviously you always need to get consent, whether it be written or verbal. And lastly, I often get asked, how do you actually take the leap and ask patients to be involved? And my answer is just ask. 99% of patients give you a huge enthusiastic yes, and they're absolutely delighted to give back. I suppose you do want to be a bit selective. Don't ask people who are unwell or have stressors going on in their life at the moment. You want someone who's generally open about their diagnosis and happy to share, and always bear in mind having diverse representation of patient groups. In terms of crafting posts on social media, always shorten your links using Bitly. It's free. Tag other relevant people to amplify your reach. Build in hashtags. I'm delighted to hear that the hashtag Radonc is trending. Add images and GIFs wherever relevant to increase engagement. It just makes it so much more interesting to people, and include a call to action if you can. And also just ask yourself, will this be interesting? I know it's a tough one. And remember, keep the key messages at the beginning of your tweet. Ask questions to encourage conversation, and monitor and respond in a timely manner. And I always think Julie McCrossan's tweets always demonstrate these tips perfectly. So thank you. I apologise if the audio got dodgy there. And thank you very much. I will stop sharing.
Thank you, Lucinda. Very interesting. Most of the audio was there. There are a couple of little gaps. Maybe we can pick those up in the questions at the end.
Oh, sorry. Thanks, Michael.
But it was a great presentation, and I think we all benefited from it. Our next speaker is David Walsh. He's the Deputy Director of Communications at Peter Mac Cancer Centre in Melbourne. David has spent more than 20 years working in communications, media management, and stakeholder and government relationships, and has significant experience in the healthcare sector. David is going to talk to us about how authors and editors can successfully work with their institutional media department to promote their publications. Thanks, David.
Thank you, Michael. I've made a mental note that I should have gone before Lucinda, but that's okay. We'll work our way through this now. Apologies if that camera is in the way. Look, thank you to the college for the opportunity to speak to you today. I think it's a really interesting topic, and one that's quite close to my heart as a media and communications professional. We deal with our researchers on a regular basis to understand what they're working on and how we can share those breakthroughs that they are making with the traditional media in the main through my role, but also more broadly through other communication channels as well. So I think probably the first thing to note is that not all media is the same. So I guess media is very much a changing landscape. The social media side of things has taken over enormously, but there's still a very strong role for traditional media to play in not only sharing news and information, but also in creating content that can then be used across those other channels like social media, whether it be the key platforms like Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, whatever the case might be for you and your research. So I guess when I say traditional media, we're talking really about print, which newspapers, TV news, radio news, and I guess radio programs, whether they be short form interviews which are used as part of news bulletins, or longer form interviews which are part of radio programs that air across the day, and also online and news websites, which still, I guess, form part of the traditional media in my eyes, because they are an extension of that print medium in a lot of ways. Vicky's already stepped us through social media, and I guess explain some of the reasons why it's so important to engage in the social media space, but there's no doubt, as both Lucinda and Vicky have pointed out, that this traditional media and social media are inextricably linked, and there are, I guess, really good reasons to be engaging with both types of platforms as you're trying to share your research. And I guess the other key thing to talk to your organisation's communications or media person about is, what's the best media for my research story? Is it social media? Is it traditional media? Is it the online or internal channels we have for sharing information within your own organisation? And if it is traditional media, well, which is the right outlet to be going to? Which is the right type of media to be using? Which is the right journalist to be taking the story to, so you get the best coverage and the best possible outcome for you and the work you've been doing? But I guess the reality of things is often a combination of all of the above is the best outcome for you. So we can often strike strike a blow where we end up being in print, TV, radio, online and social media with the one type of research and the one research story, which is always the aim for us when we're working with our researchers. So I guess the thing that we get asked often is, why are they talking about that person's research and not mine? What is it about my research that isn't getting me cut through at the moment with the media, whether that be traditional or social media? So I guess one of the things we try to reinforce to people always is the relevance of what you're talking about, and will this research you're working on impact a large number of patients or people? How will it impact them? Will it change their lives? What will it do for them? How will it make cancer care different and better going forward? As Lucinda's pointed out, this patient angle is fundamental. We need to be able to explain to the media and to their readers and listeners why this is so important. So that's the key thing for us to really be able to pick apart, is what will be the benefit for patients and others in the community from the research that's been done. One of the other key things is uniqueness. Is this the first time something like this has been done? Is it the first time this topic's been researched? Is there a particular result that's come through which is the first of its type, which then gives us just a hook that we can sell to media to be able to make the story jump out from the packet and jump out from all the other bits and pieces that have been shared over the last 2 days to try and get a story up and going. Really importantly, again, is, are we being timely with our outreach to the journalists? If the research has been released 3 months ago, there's every chance the media won't want to know about that. But if we are able to go to them and say, we've got research coming out next week, this is what it's going to be saying, these are the outcomes that they've got, then all of a sudden we have the time to work with the journalist and craft the best possible story and get this in front of their editors or whoever it might be that makes the call on what goes to air or elsewhere, to make sure they get that story up and going. We'll come back to this as I talk again further, but is the research we're working on or have been working on related to a current issue in the general community? Is it something that is topical for people who don't necessarily understand research and science and health in depth? They may be familiar with another component of what you've been working on. Is there something we can tap into there to make the research appeal to a broader audience? Sort of related to that, but not quite exactly the same, is what else is happening in the world? Is there other things that we can tap into? And the classic example at the moment is Princess Kate and her cancer diagnosis. That was front page news across the world over the weekend. We had calls coming to us asking us to explain what preventative chemotherapy might be in this example. So those sorts of things will get you coverage and get you opportunities to talk about what you're doing, just because someone else has, I guess, flagged that topic or is come to the surface in another way. And then probably a little bit superficially, are there amazing pictures or videos or something else that we can share with your story to make it more appealing? I think Lucinda just touched on that from the social media point of view. The imagery is fundamental to making posts work. It also is crucial for us if we're trying to sell stories to TV stations who are basically a visual medium. So they need to be able to share pictures to go with the words that they're saying. And if they don't have pictures, then unfortunately we don't have the story. When it comes to promoting your research though, well, I guess the first thing I would say to you is engage with your media and communications team if you do have one. That's the first step, to be able to work with them and explain to them what you've been working on and why it's important. So talk them through your research, talk them through what you've been working on. As I said, why is it important? Why should they want to find out more about it? Why should they want to share it? Really importantly, think about how you can explain what you've been working on in layman's terms. A good way of looking at this is, how would you explain it to someone within your family, whether it be your children, whether it be your mother and father, someone who's outside of your, I guess, your work sphere, who doesn't necessarily have the same understanding you have of the work you do. How would you explain it to them? How would you make them understand what you're doing? When you are simplifying things, that's the key. Can we get that across in ways that are accurate but are much more simple than the words or terms you might use when you're talking to your peers at work? An extension of that is, don't be offended if the media or your communications team simplifies what you've done. That's really an important part of our role. We are trying to take your often complicated science and research and make it accessible to as many people as we possibly can. So I guess the reality for us is we may try to simplify things to a point, But the key is we don't want to simplify the information without distorting it. So we need to make sure that when we work with you to promote your work, we are able to explain it in the most simple terms that don't actually change the meaning of what you've been doing, what you've been working on. The other key thing to think about when you're promoting your research is you need to be available and willing to speak about it. This is a really important one that not everyone gets. Researchers come in all shapes and sizes. We have people who love to be in the spotlight. We have people who are doing great work who don't love to be in the spotlight. We want to try and highlight as much of that great work that's being done as possible, but we can only really do it in the media space if we've got someone who's available and willing to speak to the media about what they've been working on and how that's going to help patients ultimately to recover more quickly from cancer. These are some examples of, I guess, traditional media coverage we've had over the last few months or last month or so at Peter Mac. So you can see the interview on ABC TV. There's also a radio interview as part of that story, news on Channel 7, Channel 10, stories in the Herald Sun and stories in the Australian, just some of the things that we've been able to land in the last probably 6 or 8 weeks, just based on the work that's happening here. And I guess having researchers, as I said, available and willing to talk to media about what they've been working on. Just to give a little bit more information about a couple of those examples that I showed there. So we had 2 of our researchers had a paper published in Nature looking at RNA-based therapeutics. So this was circular RNA-based technology. So that was a change from the mRNA technology and looking at the next step in using that to I guess, prevent and treat cancers. So we were able to generate more than 50 stories, which reached an audience of 2.5 million people across that I guess print, radio and TV mediums, additional people online as well. But the key coverage that we were talking about was in the Australian Herald Sun, a lot of radio news outlets across Victoria and South Australia, as well as on ABC TV as well. And I guess for me, one of the things we were most pleased about was some of the comments under the article that ran on the Herald Sun website, which can be a bit of a cesspool of negativity and I guess criticism, but to see comments like this one from Jackie to say that we have the best medical researchers in the world right here in Melbourne and thanking the researchers for what they do in the research space to be able to help people's lives was really great. And that was one of a number of examples that we got underneath that story to reinforce the positive of what our researchers are doing. We also had a story which was about liver regeneration and how that liver, I guess the process the liver takes to regenerate and I guess understanding what triggers that. So 2 of our researchers have been working on that. And again, we've got more than 70 stories across print, online and broadcast media that reached more than 1.8 million people. And you can see the key coverage that we got there. But again, those things are really important to be able to share, which gave us the opportunity to piggyback with our own social media content, our own web content, our own internal content for our staff to be able to see the work that their colleagues are doing. So that was all able to be triggered on the back of what we've done in that media space. So I guess to go into a little bit more detail about why these stories in particular were successful, well, clearly it starts with great research. If you've got great researchers doing great research, then happy days, we're off and racing. But one of the key things from our point of view is, as I mentioned earlier, they engage with us as a research team in advance. So we were able to work up a story and a media release and a pitch to the media on the back of early engagement from the researchers to be able to then go to journalists a week ahead and say, we've got this research coming out next Wednesday. We think it makes a great story. We'll get you a researcher, we'll get you a patient who can then explain what the benefits will be and be able to then, as Lucinda pointed to, the golden triangle, the different parts of the story that journos are all looking for, which are an expert, an outcome, and a patient story to be able to tie it all together. So we were lucky enough to have these researchers come to us in advance, so we were able to work with them to be able to develop that pitch for media and go out to them ahead of time. I guess one of the key things here was that we were able to find a unique or topical angle with the different research papers that we talked about there. So the RNA technology, as I mentioned before, it's such a ubiquitous term these days, thanks to COVID and thanks to mRNA technology and the COVID vaccine, that once we bring up a change to RNA technology, it's not a new concept for people to understand, including the journalists themselves. It's actually a concept that they are familiar with and something that we can be able to position what we've done as the next iteration of this RNA technology. So it's a progression from mRNA onto a new version of that or a new application of that technology, which then gives us an opportunity to be able to tell that story more widely. The universal impact of liver regeneration, that wasn't just a cancer story in the end, that was talking about the triggering of that regeneration process, which is applicable to any range of conditions that impact the liver, not just cancer. So again, that universal impact of what we're talking about, it gave us a much better opportunity to get coverage and I guess buy-in from journalists who wanted to know more about what we were doing. As we've talked about and previously, demonstrating the potential impact for patients is the key here. The science is fantastic and the science is absolutely crucial to what we do, but to get us traction with the media, we need to be able to explain to journalists and the listeners, readers, viewers, what it means for them or the person that they love most who might be impacted by cancer. So the patient story is crucial to everything that we do and everything that we rightly position in a way that brings it back to that benefit for the patients. As I mentioned before, this is the key for us to be able to get traction with media. We can bash out a media release. The journalist doesn't want to talk to the comms guy though. The journalist wants to talk to the expert who's done the work. So we had key authors who were available to speak with media. They were able to tell their, I guess, their story or talk about their research in a accessible way that was understood by the journalist and could be translated or presented to the public. And that way we're able to get great traction with all of those stories. So in terms of promoting your research, what are the best steps or what are the ways forward? The easiest way is make friends with your comms team, reach out to them. As I said, the more time and the more space you can give them to be able to develop a pitch for media with you and alongside you, the better the outcome will be. It means you've got time to review what they're planning to say, make sure it's accurate, make sure it's on target with the message that you wanted to be sharing, and that way they can help you actually even develop that message so you get it right together and then go out and share the information more widely. So the important thing when we're dealing with media, as I said before, is that media is a very different audience to your research colleagues. So thinking about who you're talking to, thinking about what you want to say, what you want them to take away from what you're telling them is really important. And this is, as I said before, how you would explain something to someone in your family, or why would the research you're talking about be interesting to somebody outside of your field? And that can often be challenging for people who are so expert in what they do to try and find that line between this is what I work on and what I understand really clearly versus what someone who's outside of this space understands and can comprehend as well. So it's really important to work with your comms team to develop those key messages, to develop that pitch in a way that's one, simple, but also accurate. So working with them around developing those key messages and having them in your pocket to be able to share once you get the opportunity to speak to media is crucial as well. If getting media coverage is important to you, then it's crucial that you set aside some time to do it well. As I said before, the availability of experts to speak to media will make or break a story. If you've got somebody who is prepared to make time in their day to talk to the media, and it can often be at short notice, it might be a really tight deadline for a journalist who's working on a story, or it might be a phone call we get from a radio station wanting to talk to somebody for a news bulletin that's going to air in 15 minutes time. Just a matter of understanding that there will be calls on you and your time to be able to share your message well and get that out there to the broader community. So if you are wanting that media coverage and wanting that exposure for the great work you're doing, then please make the time and put some time aside to be able to do it well. And as we've heard already from both Vicky and Lucinda, combining what you've done with the traditional media with your social media will actually expand the reach of your research. So those messages that you develop that will go towards the journalists or go to the journalists and the traditional media will often be exactly what you want to be sharing by social media as well. So if you're working with your media team or communications team to develop key messages that will help you sell your story to the media, they will also be able to then use those key messages to share the story via social media, via your website, via your internal channels as well. Those messages don't need to change an awful lot. They can be tweaked, but once you've got them agreed and once you've got them right, then they are useful across a various number of platforms. That was all I had to share today, but look, thank you to everyone for your time. And look, if you have any questions, please let me know. I'm happy to share some more knowledge.
Great, thank you very much, David. We're now going to go to the questions and answers. Could I ask all the presenters to turn on their cameras and microphones, please? 1, 2, 3, and Lucinda, do we still have you? Great. Okay, so a nice quick question to start with. What's the best time to post and promote on social media? I think, Vicky, this is your expertise.
Yes, anyone else can chip in if you have other thoughts, but the best time, again, studies have shown is between 7 to 10 a.m. in the morning, and then about 12 to 2 p.m. and 6 to 9 p.m. So I would say it coincides with, you know, commuting time, lunch breaks, unless, as Lucinda pointed out, unless you're a teenager, then you've been on there all day long. So
people are basically looking at this while they're having their meal or lunch or breakfast or something like that. Huh?
Yeah.
Right. So I think probably one of the classic questions about social media interactions is, what do you do about trolls and negative feedback? And Lucinda, Vicky, anybody else who's got some opinions about this, please jump in. But Lucinda, do you get much in the way of negative feedback, trolls?
I mean, I stay pretty vanilla on social media, so I haven't personally. But look, targeting cancer certainly, not often, but a few times had some bizarre trolling and negative feedback. Our approach has always been to ignore and unfollow or block, particularly for things that people that are clearly trolls. If you are going to engage in debate, I think, you know, the people that I see do it well always maintain respectful language. It never denigrate to personal insults, and just stay eternally diplomatic. And the real take-home message from that is, if you follow people getting into arguments and debates where it does denigrate into more personal insults, you see the number of views and likes just dropping. No one wants to see that stuff or read that stuff. So let that be motivation not to get involved, because people just tune out when it devolves in that way.
David, from a professional media point of view?
Well, it's probably more online and in social media. You see that, Michael, to be honest with you, and I would agree with Lucinda. I think often communities will self-moderate at times. If somebody is being out of line, then they will be corrected by people who are also part of your audience or your community as well. But you know, we find that at times, it doesn't happen often, but at times we have to block different followers who are clearly just looking to try and create a debate or create trouble, not looking for an actual conversation. They are looking to be difficult. So it is just a matter of, I guess, making a judgment call about the best approach, but certainly remaining positive, remaining professional in the language that you use is the key thing. And I guess let somebody else be seen as the problem rather than you yourself or the organisation you work for.
Great. And Vicky, do you have anything else to add? You said always respond, but then I immediately thought there are people I don't want to respond to.
Yeah, no, not to those comments. So I would definitely agree. Don't engage, and if you do, remain respectful in your language, because that reflects on you know, your own character and your work.
Okay. So I have a question from the audience for David, who asks, do you directly contact the editor-in-chief of the journal to hold the article publication so it will correspond with the mainstream news publications? My experience is the news publication has to wait until the journal's ready in most times. And when should authors contact their communication team? When the manuscript's in production, or when it's been accepted, or when there's an actual publication date?
Look, I think to answer the first question first, there's often, or there's always, an embargo, I find, on publications coming out. So we often work with the publication, but also work with the researcher to make sure we've got something ready to go, which I guess doesn't breach that embargo. We will often give something to a journalist under embargo so they can't print or publish ahead of that time. But I guess we work with both the journal, the researcher, and and the journalists to make sure we don't step out of line when it comes to that sort of thing. In terms of when it's a good time for researchers to reach out, look, I think once you've got the paper accepted, that's a great time to come to us, because it often means we might have a 4-week window where they're still finalising some of the small parts of the paper before it's published. We've then got lots of time to be able to work backwards and forwards and get the messages right, and then once the embargo is good, to get that out ASAP from there. So that would be my advice, as early as possible. Once you know it's been accepted and it's going to be published, we can work with the publication to work out the publication date, but certainly reaching out earlier once it's been accepted is the best way to go.
Great, thanks. And a question for Karen and for Simon. I think there are a number of rules about sharing papers. When they first publish, they're often available for free. I'm not talking about the open access type, but the subscriber type things. And there are rules about putting them in repositories. So I wonder if the two of you could, perhaps Karen first of all about repositories, and then Simon about the overall issues.
Yep, so you always need to obviously look at the licensing agreement of any publication that you have, or any agreement that you have with publishers. In terms of repositories, there is an onus to have an open access available publication as part of medical research. So that's something that's come out recently. So it may be a preprint that you upload into a repository, and then after that embargo period, that would be able to be brought into the repository itself. Otherwise, you're looking at the licensing agreements that you have with different databases. So each institution, for example, each library might have different licensing agreements if they are behind a paywall. So it really depends on who you're publishing with and what agreements that you have.
And Simon, there are some grace periods to promote the papers too. I think this is one of the arguments for getting your social media out early.
Yeah, no, I'll echo what Karen mentioned with the need to check the agreements that you're entering into as you publish, and certainly open access makes this much easier in terms of sharing and being able to add to repositories. But even looking at the different versions of the paper, Karen mentioned the idea of using preprints and a preprint version. But even when we look at the version that's been submitted to the journal, the version that's been accepted, and the version that has been published, there's different timeframes around when that's able to be archived as well. So it does pay to check in if you're publishing not open access, what those terms are, so you know what you can deposit into a repository. And on the flip side, it's worth checking with any funders as well to make sure you're aware of what the requirements are. Karen mentioned through the universities, there's a requirement to often deposit into their own repositories, but if you do have other funding sources, then there may be some restrictions around that as well. The benefit of those funds is that they often cover open access, so you can make those deposits. So yeah, always important to read the fine print of those. But outside of open access and sharing, then there certainly is the opportunity to make content freely available for promotional purposes as well. And I'd echo David's mention about if you've got the potential for media access, let people know early on, let the media unit know, let the publisher know as well, so we can coordinate those embargoes at a publication level and coordinate promotional free access to content as well. Certainly the earlier that we're aware of, we can work together to make sure that the research has the greatest availability, the greatest discoverability, and the greatest impact because of that. It's really a collaborative effort.
Yeah, so JMIRO also nominates papers that are available for open access with every issue. And we're just doing a trial of creating video abstracts to promote, to be used with Twitter or Facebook or other things.
I was also just going to mention that as well. You can promote in different ways. So video abstracts, visual abstracts, online flip books, or if you presented as part of a conference posters, these are your works. You could link to your manuscript, or you could link to your original work, and if it wasn't open access, it still generates interest, and people can then try and find that through perhaps their institution if it was behind a paywall.
Okay, and the final question is, I guess, to everybody, what's the best advice for connecting with potential collaborators or other researchers in the field? Well, my advice is to present your work to those potential collaborators as often as you can at various meetings, research groups, and so on. And while there might be restrictions on you posting papers or people getting access, there's no restriction on you giving somebody a copy of your paper as a private communication. So that's sort of always, and I always respond to requests for papers as individual private communications, because this helps create a relationship with people and does help promote in a very small way your research, but it does mean that people will know that they can get to you for stuff that might otherwise be difficult to access. So I would like to thank all our presenters for a fascinating webinar, really very instructive. I learned quite a bit anyway, and I'd like to thank the college for hosting this. Stay tuned, there'll be another one of these webinars next year. JMIRO is committed to improving the experience for our authors and getting our research used and recognised. So thank you everybody again. Oh, one final thing. This webinar will be available in the college library. There'll be a recording of it if you want to go back over any part of it. So thanks again, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Sorry, I don't think Mariana, we can hear you. I think Mariana was just wrapping up and saying that that's good. I can chime in. It's Sarah from the college. Just to let everyone know, there will be you'll get a certificate of attendance for attending this webinar tomorrow, and that a survey will be sent out as well. So yeah, your feedback is extremely important to us. So yeah, that was all. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for your time this afternoon.
Bye.